The purpose of this video is to give you a basic understanding of concept for graphic designers. A lot of people new to graphic design think it's all about the computer, learning Photoshop and Illustrator. They are necessary skills for graphic design, but graphic design really is problem solving. Your client has a problem, you come in and you solve it for them visually with great ideas. So your job in the problem-solving team as a new graphic designer might be making interesting things in Illustrator and Photoshop, but the money and the promotions come with idea generating. All good design has a concept, and that should not be plural because there should only be one concept to a design. Now, sometimes people will say, well, look at this bank brochure here. What's the concept? I don't see any big idea like you've been explaining to us about this whole, verbal plus visual equals the message, which we'll get into. Well, sometimes that's the easiest way to explain what concept is looking at something that is, what you might consider a little bit on the lame side or the boring side, but that is also successful, like a good bank brochure. And then you'll get the understanding that there is a concept there, but then some design is conceptually driven, meaning it has that wow factor about concept. And that's where you want to be with a lot, as many as you can possibly be of your portfolio pieces. But first, let's look at just the easy way. So all concept really means is an idea. And I learned this from John Drew at Cal State Fullerton. He breaks graphic design into 6 elements. And the first one, the king, always at the top, is concept, the idea behind the project. So even if it is, let's say, a bank brochure, then everything that you do with these remaining 5 elements of graphic design must support the concept. So if it's a bank brochure, your typography is going to be conservative, showing that there's trust, right? That's basically your concept, is trust. Put your money with us. So your color choices are also going to be conservative. They're probably going to be an analogous color palette rather than being a triad or something that's all over the place. The images that you use in the design will be conservatively placed and used. The composition or the grid of the work will be very stable. The format the brochure is on will probably be something pretty simple like a trifold. It won't be something that would frustrate people that are opening it up. It wouldn't be a whole lot of fun. It would just be right to the point, balanced, conservative, trustworthy. That's your concept. Now, when it comes to conceptually driven design, that's where you want to go beyond the obvious. Now, there's 3 parts to a concept, the way I like to explain it. You have the verbal part of your design, you have the visual part of your design, and then you have the overall message. Now, if all 3 are the same, that is lame. If all 3 are different, then you and your design are probably pretty awesome. So let's stick with this for a little bit and look at some visuals. Chip Kidd is a famous book designer. He and Theron Moore at Cal State Fullerton both had Lanny Samis as instructors. So I picked this up from Theron, but then years later I watched some of Chip Kidd's TED Talks, and I heard it again from him, the way that Lanny explained concept. Go up to the board, he would draw an apple, write the word apple underneath it, and he'd say, if this is your design, you're treating your audience like they're idiots. Or in other words, the verbal, apple, the visual, apple, and the message that you're talking about an apple are all the same. So thus lame. If you're working on the word power project, most of the solutions for that can be boiled down to one technique called replacement. Now, I'm going to show you two lame examples of replacement, and then let's see if we can't move on and get more conceptual. Word flower, and then you just simply substitute the O in the flower for an actual flower. It's okay in that it's a modest adjustment. You're not doing too much to it, although some might argue that's too much. But it's just lame. It's one-to-one. You're saying flower, you're showing flower. Or similar would be the word ball, and you dress up the A to look like the stitches on a football. Although it's a little bit more clever or advanced than flower, it's still one-to-one. You're saying ball, you're showing a ball. This is one, sometimes people don't get this at first. If it was done with a regular font, it's a little bit easier to recognize, because sometimes people think this is some kind of symbol here, but it's actually a K just laying on its back. And as soon as you hear that, you're like, oh, I get it. So why is this so much better than the other ones? You could still argue, isn't this one-to-one? Aren't you saying drunk and showing drunk? But are you really? I mean, there is no immediate description that pops in someone's head when you hear drunk. And I think the difference is, like, nouns that are one-to-one, like ball and flower, are horrible. But showing a word and then the visual, I mean, this by itself, this K is not drunk, right? I mean, it's just a K laying on its back, so it's a lot more to it than that. You're saying drunk eventually, because first of all, you have to figure that part of it out. What are they saying? Oh, that's a K laying down. But you're showing the act of being drunk. I mean, basically, what you're showing is the word drunk. Okay, so drunk with the K falling over. But what is the message? The message really in this case is fallen down drunk. So thus way better than one-to-one. A student come in with the solution for this word. First of all, pause and see if you couldn't come up with the solution with a very simple, and I mean a very simple modification to this word. That was it. Now, the funny thing is, because the student was new to graphic design, he didn't even believe that that was a strong solution for him. So he came in the next week with this, and I'm like, no, now you're showing a drip and you're saying drip. The other way, it was just a beautiful slight manipulation that somebody, if this was up on the wall and no one had an idea of what was going on, they might walk by it 10 times and not notice that the eye was upside down. And if you just keep on every time you are working on a conceptual design, once you get it down to a couple good possibilities, say this out loud. The verbal component of my design is. The visual component of my design is. Fill in the blank. The message is. So let's do it with that one we just saw. The verbal is drip. The visual, luckily, is not. If we keep saying the same thing for all three of these, we've got something that's not so good. So the verbal is drip. The visual is just a misplaced dotted I. The message is the act of dripping. So thus not one-to-one, thus a very good solution. Fixed the spelling of Lanny Samise's name here, so in case you want to look him up, or Chip Kidd, you'll find a lot of great work and a lot of just great information. Okay, so we looked at what I thought were two good examples. I'll remind you that if you are working word power project, don't go looking for solutions online. I've shown you enough to get you started on that. And you'll see a video on mind mapping next. And with all that, you should be able to crank out some good solutions. Now, I did ask you, if you were working on that project, to see if you could make a better solution for the word balloons than just a line hanging from it. So, and if you're just watching this video for the first time, see if you can't do that. So the early solution to a word power project was taking the word balloons and just putting two strings from the O's, one-to-one, right? So not that great. But if you can think of a word that has an O or another letter in it that you could make a balloon out of, then you could be on your way to a much better solution that would not be one-to-one. So here's one of the most common answers after give students a chance to think about this for a while, is they say, oh yeah, clown, that makes sense, right? So I'm saying clown, I'm showing a modified letter O. My message is clowns use balloons. Also suggested was the word helium, where just the dot of the I is floating away. I had the word king suggested with the I, the dot of the I floating away for Stephen King because of the movie that was real popular a couple years ago. With the clown, the scary clown, can't think of the name of it right now. But that was interesting in that that was even further removed from wherever you go to from one to one, is you had to make the connection king and then the balloon next to king, why king? And then you'd have to think, oh, Stephen King. So a solution like that when the movie's out, like right now, can be good. But years later, it might be a little too like campy where very few people would get it. The word float was suggested with the letter O becoming a balloon and sort of floating away. My favorite though, and this is what the student who first came in with balloon ended up doing. Hooray. So you think of that. What is your verbal? Hooray. What is your visual? Modified O that after a while you make out is a balloon. What is the message? It's like partying, right? Something that goes on at a party. So very nice that all three, meaning the verbal, the visual, and the message, are all different. That's as good as conceptual design gets. Be careful about overdoing it. Sometimes people think, oh, I've got to look for every opportunity for a balloon that's in here now. And they make this one a balloon and they make that one a balloon. Usually just one is enough. Think sophistication. You don't want your audience to feel like you're beating a dead horse. You want them to be able to say, oh, I got it. That's clever. Not, okay, yeah, I got it. Enough is enough. The only exception to that is where it makes sense that you kind of need to do it more than once. Because if we would have just seen one with a dot on it, we'd just think it was an I, right? But with three things, even the L dotted, it takes, at least 2, 3 to get the idea of family across. Otherwise, don't beat the dead horse. Beautiful thing about putting a lot of thought into your design before you just start on the computer is one, it's going to have more appeal if there's a solid idea there. Two is that when you come up with a really good concept, no matter what you're designing, all of the rest of it just seems to fall into place. When you have a really good idea, it's like you know what typography you have to use because it has to support that really great idea. You wouldn't come up with an idea that's getting something old-fashioned feeling across and then use a sans serif typeface or the opposite. You wouldn't come up with a concept that's really wild and young and energetic and then come up with a real conservative, like a muted analogous color palette or a, you would make the color scream just like your concept is screaming youth. And you would pick an image that supports the concept. Your composition of your grid's probably going to be very wild, much more asymmetrical than it would be symmetrical. The format that you're working on, let's say it was a CD for a popular artist. What are you going to do as a graphic designer? You're going to say, do you want this to be really, really good? Then let's think outside the box of that little slipcover plastic jewel case. Think of Metallica's album they put out a few years ago called Death Magnet that actually had a huge series of die cuts in the shape of the casket on the front of it. I mean, that kind of stuff, it's more expensive, but you get to have fun with the concept, and that album actually won a design award. And that's where you want the level of all your design to be, where it is as conceptually driven as possible, where people look at it, for a half a second they don't get it, and then they're like, wow, that was a clever design, that was a good use of format. Make it stand out, make it awesome.